Jay, can you hear me?
Yeah, so he logged in as host, and so it came up, and then I popped in, like, so it opened it for me. So I don't know if you want to try logging in. Do you have another computer or on your phone? Like, if you want to try logging in as a participant? Okay.
Jaleesa, I don't know if it's just
Okay.
me, but you sound like you're 100 miles away in the tunnel.
Hey, this is Randall.
Hey, Randall, sorry, we somehow both DeBrittany and I were having some major issues getting on. So Russ is currently host. She's going to a different computer to try to log on, and then we'll kind of share the host thing with her so she can still help navigate. But hopefully she'll be on in the next minute or two.
Okay.
Jaleesa, can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. You just sounded a far distance away earlier, but you sound better now.
Oh, okay.
I was worried that I wasn't getting heard.
No, I can hear you. And it may be, like I said, I'm having, I think my issues are my internet for whatever reason is, it's moving at the speed of a snail right now. So.
Okay, cool. And hi, Randall.
Hey, Russ. Good afternoon.
Russ, in the interim, while DeBrittany tries to get on, can you make, because so that you can focus on the actual presentation, can you make me co-host, and that way I can at least start the recording and stuff?
Yes, I'd like to do that because I just got a message from Zach Means to make him the captioner, and I haven't done this enough to even know how to do that.
Okay.
So it shows that it shows.
Oh, you're here, DeBrittany? Okay.
Yes, apologies, but I'm here.
Okay. So we need to make Zach.
To our heart. The CDFI Fund has selected our firm and other partnering organizations, including my co-presenter, Russ Thellen's organization, University of Massachusetts, Boston, to deliver this training and technical assistance series entitled Access for All. Next slide. So the Access for All training series is geared toward increasing knowledge on disability market characteristics, customer service etiquette, and accessibility considerations. Those of you who are part of this webinar are undoubtedly connected to the CDFI industry, and this series is geared toward working with those in the CDFI community around how products and services offered by CDFIs with demonstrated needs and demand, and with the product features expressed by and for people with disabilities. We're working to help equip all of you and your counterparts, your colleagues, with the necessary information, networks, and resources to set a strategic course of action to serve the disability community. And I think about this series as really helping to build the capacity of community development financial institutions to better serve, better support, and better provide services and products to persons with disabilities. Next slide. This series is multifaceted. There were in-person trainings that were conducted in Philadelphia, New Orleans, and Los Angeles. This is the first of several webinars that will be offered. And there's the provision of technical assistance that is actually being made available right now. I'll talk about that later on in the presentation to encourage those of you on this webinar to apply for technical assistance. But across all those activities, training, webinars, technical assistance, and the like, this series has a number of learning objectives to help provide information about the origins of the disability civil rights movement and its importance to the spirit of the work by CDFIs, to help people learn about the policies, legal frameworks, and organizational network that support people with disabilities, to learn key aspects of disability etiquette and accessibility. Naturally, that is at the center of today's webinar, disability etiquette, accommodations, to help people learn about methods and data sources useful for informing product design for the people that all of you intend to serve, to offer examples of partnerships, sources and uses of funding, CDFI products, and how these are structured and underwritten with an emphasis on persons with disabilities, and then offer templates and toolkits and other infrastructure that can scaffold your work to design products, test usability, and monitor the performance of your efforts to better serve persons with disabilities. Next slide. Your instructors today are first, yours truly. Speaking is Randall Pinkett. I'm going to pass to my colleague Russ Felon in a moment to introduce himself, but suffice it to say, I'm actually wearing 3 hats in my role today. I am a managing partner at BCT, and so I represent the organization as we lead this work on behalf of the CDFI Fund. I am also the interim project manager for the Access for All initiative, working closely with my colleagues Tanisha Washington and Jay Dong and our ecosystem of partners to deliver on all the components I mentioned earlier. And then more specific to this presentation, my third hat is as a subject matter expert around diversity and inclusion, and more specifically for today's conversation around unconscious bias and implicit bias, and how these principles of unconscious bias and implicit bias impact how we perceive, how we engage, and how we can overcome challenges to better serving persons with disabilities. And I am super excited to be working alongside Russell Felon on this work. I am learning every day personally about my journey to better supporting persons with disabilities, and I've learned a lot from Russ in that regard. And so I will pass to Russ for his own introduction, and then we'll proceed with the webinar. Russ?
Good afternoon, everyone. As was mentioned, my name is Russ Talene, and I am a senior policy fellow at the University of Massachusetts Boston Institute for Community Inclusion. To give you a little background on myself, I've been in the disability field for almost 30 years, primarily in the role of a counselor, a supervisor, and administrator within vocational rehabilitation programs, where we work with individuals with all types of disabilities to help them to seek employment, self-sufficiency, and independence. And it's very nice to be a part of this group. It's nice to be a part of this presentation, and I hope that as we go along, there's some meaningful content for you here. I know that Randall has some great information that on unconscious bias that was very informative to me as we worked on putting this together. And so the combination of what he brings to the table and what I hope to share with you today, we leave you with some good information to help you as you move forward. So Randall, thank you, and I'll toss it back to you.
Thank you, Russ. Thank you. Let's go to the next slide. So let's introduce today's topic in today's webinar. This webinar is focused on providing training on disability etiquette and common accommodations for individuals with disabilities to access and benefit from CDFI services. We'll be talking about a number of topics during our time today, providing disability-sensitive communications, creating a safe and accessible CDFI workspace, managing the physical environment, interviewing, services provision, conflict resolution, and the pitfalls of making assumptions and unconscious bias. We hope to accomplish 2 overarching objectives: to increase your comfort, your confidence, and your competence. Call those the 3 C's. Your comfort, your confidence, and your competence in working with individuals with disabilities, seeking economic growth and opportunity through CDFI services. And I'll say on this topic, as I have, again, been under my own journey to increase my own comfort and confidence and competence. And again, Russ Talene has been a part of my educational process. I'd say a good rule of thumb going into this webinar and beyond the webinar is if you have any discomfort around these topics, around these issues, that's okay. I suggest that you should lean into that discomfort and really look to expand your horizons and move beyond your comfort zone to embrace new ways of thinking, new ways of working, new ways of engaging. And I'm hopeful that this webinar will aid you in that regard. Second objective is to offer disability etiquette tips and strategies, both generally for any topic, but also specifically for types of disability, for varied specific types of disability. And so we'll, again, based on Russ's experience, we will be talking about how to contextualize all of this information from a disability perspective. Next slide. So let's begin by taking a simple poll, and we'd love to hear from you. And I want to welcome all of you again to this webinar who took the time out of your busy schedules. You should have a poll on your screen at the moment with a very simple question. And that question is, are you already working in the disability community? Russ and I would love to get a pulse of the audience relative to this question. So if you could go ahead and click yes, you are already involved in working in the disability community, or click no, you are not already working in the disability community. We will compile your responses and we will summarize the responses on the screen. And so while you all are taking a moment to make your selections, just know that we'll be conducting these polls a few times throughout the webinar. So this will not be the only poll. It is not the last poll, but we've got results from the poll. Right, so looks like 44% of you are currently working in the disability community. 56% of you are not already working in the disability community. And so it's almost parity, but a majority of you, this is a relatively new arena. And that's exactly why the Access for All series is in place. And that is so that we can see greater awareness, greater education, and build greater capacity so that the CDFI community can leverage its tremendous resources in supporting the disability community. So for those of you who are working in the disability community, glad to have you. For those that are new, also glad to have you. Looking forward to a great conversation, a great webinar today. Let's go on to the next slide. So I'm going to pass to Russ to continue with the introduction here and getting us situated. And so Russ, the proverbial microphone is back to you.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Dr. Randall. Now, I too was really pleased to see that mix in the poll. For those of you who are working in the disability arena with those groups of individuals and such, hopefully what we share today can be some value added to you. And for those of you who are not, we hope that this is, even more so of value to you as we go forward. The most common response that's reported regarding having unfamiliarity with interacting with people with disabilities is that of feeling awkward. We have a short YouTube video that we want to share with you showing people with disabilities sharing why there is no need to be awkward as it relates to interacting with them. So let's take a few minutes. It's only about 3.5 minutes long, so it's a great introduction to where we want to go today. We'll watch this video now. Sounds like we're having some issues with sound on this. We're just doing some quick troubleshooting here and see if we can't try this again and find some sound to go with it. So be patient with us for just one moment. Brittany, I'm still not getting sound.
We do have the benefit of the subtitles to the extent that I know I'm able to follow from the subtitles.
Yeah, there's something about that. If we could find the sound, it would definitely be more impactful if it were able to be worked out.
Agreed.
Okay, Russ, is it possible we could come back to the video? I'll do some troubleshooting on my end.
Oh, absolutely. I think that would be fine. We can do that. Let's go ahead while you do some troubleshooting on that. And if you'll just interject when you feel like you've got that handled, and we'll take a pause and watch it, because I do think it's worth hearing from these folks, because they are individuals with disabilities, talking about why there's not a need to be awkward around those and some of the things you can do to address that. So yeah, let's go ahead and let's go back to the slideshow, and Brittany, just let me know when you're ready. If you could go to the next slide then for me. Okay, great, thank you. So what's the major barrier to assisting individuals with disabilities? It's not unusual for people to think in terms of barriers when they consider people with disabilities. Those things that are assumed that they cannot or have difficulty doing, or assumptions on what people can do. When we regard people with disabilities, there is something to be said about coming to the realization that the biggest barrier really has nothing to do with the disabling condition itself. It is our own situation. And so as you look at this slide, you can see some barriers across the bottom that really are the major barriers when we talk about disability. One is not knowing about the disability itself, in general or specifically. That fear of the unknown can be a barrier. Next, what we think we know about a disability. We can think we know information, but really not know as much as we might want to. So that lack of knowledge can be a barrier to our ability to interact with and have meaningful engagement with disability and individuals who have an impairment. Third, it can be literally our own discomfort, and going back to the video we're working on, awkwardness about disabilities or a particular disability in particular. And lastly, one of the barriers can be what we don't know that we don't know about disability. And so as you think on these particular 4 areas of barriers, I think it's good for us to, kind of keep those in our mind, to periodically assess ourselves on these and think about where we're coming from. Do we have a fear around these issues? Is it a lack of knowledge, or is it simply that we don't know what we don't know? And as we touch on that, we come to the topic of unconscious bias that I'm excited to have Dr. Randall Pinkett share with us, so that we can maybe start to take a look at that particular barrier because of the significance that it plays. So the proverbial microphone is now back to you, Randall.
Hey, Russ, I ran track in college. I'm going to take that baton and run with it. How's that sound?
All right. You do it.
All right, next slide. Thank you, Russ. So Russ gave a great segue to this topic of unconscious bias, and he talked about some of the underlying factors that may that are not that are major barriers, not the disability itself being the major barrier, but oftentimes some of some of what we bring to the table. And so there's this model I want to walk you through that I'll refer back to, but it does a nice job of framing how unconscious bias impacts what it is that we bring to the table, or what we aren't aware we're bringing to the table. And it's called the know-don't-know model. And so if we advance the slide, I want you to imagine that this circle represents all the things that you know and don't know, say about disability, for example. Or let's just abstract it. Let's just say all the things that you know and don't know about diverse populations, perhaps even populations that are different than you. So first of all, there's your knowledge. And your knowledge breaks down into two arenas. First, there's the things that you know. And so think about your lived experience. Think about where you grew up, or where you currently work, the CDFI that you're employed by, the home that you grew up in. You know about all these things. But equal to knowing about these things, you know that you know these things. You know that you know about what it means to work at your CDFI. You know that you know what it is like to grow up in your household. You know that you know what it's like to grow up in the city you grew up in. And so in this arena, advance the slide, please, you are operating in an arena where you are consciously competent. That is, you are consciously aware of the things for which you are competent about. Your home upbringing, your organizational dynamics, the city, the culture of the city where you grew up. The second part of your knowledge, advance the slide, are the things that you don't know. And I think it was Einstein who said, the more I know, the more I realize I don't know, or the more I realize I need to learn more, or something along those lines. Einstein was more articulate than me. But there's a lot that you don't know, with all due respect. There's lots that I don't know, with all due respect. For example, you don't know what it's like to grow up in my household. I never saw you. You don't know what it's like to grow up in my neighborhood. I don't think I recognize any names on the registration list from my neighborhood. And you don't know what it's like to work at my firm, BCT Partners. Last I checked, none of the registrants were employed by BCT. And so, but equal to not knowing these things, you know that you don't know these things. And so advance the slide. In this regard, you are consciously incompetent, meaning you are consciously aware of the things that you don't know, because you know you don't know them. And you're actually okay with that. You're okay not knowing what it's like to grow up in my household. With all due respect, I don't take any offense to that. But if you advance the slide, the third stop on the know-don't-know model is where we get into the things that you think you know. And Russ referred to this, and we think about the disability community and the things that we think we know. And if you advance the slide, this is the arena of assumptions. Think about a situation where you made an assumption about someone. Simple example, perhaps you were or are younger in your career, and somebody made an assumption about what they thought you could not do. You probably took offense to that, or felt slighted, or felt like they undervalued what you brought to the table. Well, think about all of the things that we think we know where we make assumptions and we're wrong. What happens? It gets us into trouble, and that's pitfall number one. There's a second pitfall that can get us into more trouble. So I want you to put a pin on this first pitfall of assumptions. The next stop is the things that we know but don't know that we know. Now that sounds like a tongue twister. What in the world could you know but not know you know? If you advance the slide, the answer is culture. There are certain cultures that you've grown up in, certain environments you become accustomed to. And if you're like me, quite honestly, I did not grow up in an environment around many persons with disabilities. And so if I look at the culture that I grew up in, there are things I know about that culture but don't know that I know. So for example, as an American, having grown up in the United States, I only realized there were things I knew but didn't know I knew about American culture until I left the country. when I lived in England for 2 years, I quickly realized there are things I know about American culture, but didn't know that I knew, that we drive on a certain side of the road and others don't. That our light bulbs screw in, others they snap in. That our steering wheel's on the left side of the car, others have it on the right. And so I had things I knew but didn't know that I knew, only to realize when I left the culture I was accustomed to, it became clear that these were things that I was unconsciously competent. Advance the slide. That the cultures you're accustomed to, you are unconsciously competent about how to navigate those cultures. If you've grown up in Chicago, and I know we have the Chicago Community Loan Fund on the call, shouts to CCLF. If you grew up in Chicago, you are unconsciously competent about how to navigate Chicago. And if you're an American, you're unconsciously competent about how to navigate America. If I take you out of Chicago or take you out of America, you might quickly realize there are things that you know but don't know you know, reflecting the cultures you're familiar with. The last stop on our journey for the know, don't know model are the things that you don't know that you don't know. And this gets back to what Russ was talking about. These are your unconscious biases. I'll say this again in a moment, but I'm going to say it now. We used to think that bias was conscious and intentional, that we knew our biases and our behaviors intentionally reflected those biases. What we now know is that our biases are largely unconscious and unintentional. We didn't mean to do it, and we weren't even aware that we did it. So you can imagine if you are not familiar or have been kind of acculturated to know more about the disability community, you may behave in ways that you're unaware of and were unintended. And so part of our goal for today is twofold. When we talk about your unconscious biases, advance the slide, what we're really talking about is those areas where you are unconsciously incompetent. One more advance. Unconsciously incompetent. And that's the second pitfall. And the reason why this one is more dangerous is because if you don't know that you don't know, there's nothing you can do differently. And so our goal for today, Russ and I, is for you to do two things. A, raise your awareness of your biases, kind of build your cultural knowledge base around the disability community. And then second, give you some tools to take action that you can behave in ways that are conscious and more respectful, more tuned, more supportive of persons with disabilities. And so with that, let's move on to the next slide. So the new science of unconscious bias, you can just flip through the bullets as I'm talking. It draws on multiple disciplines, biology and neuroscience, brain and cognitive science, sociology, biology, psychology. Again, traditionally, we thought that bias was aberrant, strange, conscious, we're aware of it, and intentional, we meant to do it. But the next bullet tells us that what we've learned and how these fields have converged and come to agreement is that we understand that bias is normal. We all have biases. It's largely unconscious. We're unaware. And it is largely unintentional. We did not mean to do it. Next slide. So when we think about bias in the context of today's conversation about the disability community, we want to pose another question to you, which is how many seconds do you think it takes to form a first impression of a stranger? You know, we often talk about first impressions being lasting impressions. I'd love to hear from you, all of you. How many seconds do you think it takes to form that first impression of a stranger? So once again, go ahead and jump in and cast your vote, and we will summarize the results momentarily. But as you are voting, you can hopefully see the direction where we're going when it comes to how we form impressions about persons with disabilities, and how what we don't know that we don't know can manifest itself in our behaviors towards persons with disabilities in ways that we're unaware and are unintentional. And so only by raising awareness, and we hope to do that today, can we go from unconscious biased behaviors to more consciously inclusive behaviors, which is where we hope to move you along your journey today. So go ahead and cast your vote on how many seconds you think it takes to form a first impression of a stranger. All right, we got our results. And let me say that, of course, you all know I know the answer, right? But let me just say that before I knew the answer, this is like phoning a friend on a televised game show. Like my guess was a second, which is the majority of what folks said, 41% at 1 second. That was my guess before I knew the answer. But 24% of you are a step ahead of where I used to be, because the answer is alarmingly, amazingly 1/10 of a second. Can you believe that? Somebody out there in cyberspace is nodding their head left to right saying, wow. And you can't see me, but I'm nodding my head anyway in agreement with you. Wow. 1/10 of a second, folks, to form a first impression of a stranger. Let me say it differently, 1/10 of a second to form an impression of a person with disability. Let's go to the next slide. There's been research that's been done that looks at first impressions. The way that these Princeton psychologists conducted the research was that they showed pictures of strangers. They exposed people to pictures of a stranger, and kind of recorded their reaction, and then recorded their subsequent reactions for longer exposures, and found that the impression that is formed within 1/10 of a second is the impression that holds, and that what we often seek after that first impression is reflective of what's called a confirmation bias. That a confirmation bias is where you seek information and evidence to support the conclusions you've already drawn. And so if you're looking to learn more about that, you can Google the article in Psychology Science that was published by psychologists Willis and Todorov. But it's incredible finding, because if you see where we're going, and let's just know this, I'm laying a foundation for Russ to take us deeper into this topic of disability etiquette and accommodation. When we think about the foundation for this, just know that if you combine the idea that unconscious bias, the things we don't know that we don't know, can manifest itself in ways that are unintended and we're unaware, and I say and we're forming those impressions in 1/10 of a second. If you haven't pieced together the pieces of that puzzle, what it tells me, tells you, tells us, is that we are heavily susceptible to making wrong assumptions and erroneous conclusions about people, and that's partly how our brains are wired. Next slide. So to understand the underpinnings of unconscious bias, know that our lived experiences, our personal experiences, the places we grew up, the people we grew up around, the environments that we were exposed to and have been exposed to, become hardwired into our cognitive functioning. That is, our personal experiences become hardwires. And when I think of a hardwire, I think of that as a proxy for a bias. A bias is a hardwire. And so our biases are triggered by primarily things that we can see, that are visible: race, ethnicity, gender, age, and a discernible disability. All of these are triggers for our biases that can then reflect in our behaviors in ways that we didn't know and were unintentional. Our biases are likely to be activated by 4 key conditions. First, when we're under stress. Hopefully none of you are under stress right now. Second, when we're under time constraints, when we're faced with a deadline or have to get something done quickly or efficiently or expeditiously. Third, when we are multitasking, which is becoming more and more common in this technologically driven, hyper-accelerated world that we live in today. And then third, the need for closure. I also described this as the need to move on to something else. Now I want you to look at those 4 conditions: stress, time constraints, multitasking, and the need for closure, and ask yourself the question, does this sound like any of your jobs? I know it sounds like my job on certain days. But here's the good news of the day, webinar participants. And this comes from Dr. Mazarun Banaji, one of the pioneers of unconscious bias at Harvard University. She says the following, that biases are learned so they can be unlearned. Much like our lived experience creates the biases, we can create new experiences, new learnings that can unlearn those very same biases and create new ways of behaving and raising awareness that we can be intentional in how we treat others. And that's a real great takeaway for today. Biases are learned and they can be unlearned. Let's go to the next slide. So here's a quote that helps bridge the gap between what I've been talking about generally and theoretically, and how this applies to all of you as CDFI practitioners and professionals. And I'll read this quote from John Holdsclaw, who attended an unconscious bias training at a conference, and he's also the vice chair of the CDFI Coalition and a banking executive. He says that as a CDFI Coalition board member, I have worked to build upon our base of knowledge by learning about the diverse communities that CDFIs work in, as well as delve into our own unconscious bias that we carry with us every day. We are all human. Again, bias is normal. We all have bias. DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion are no longer quote unquote soft issues and have now become a business imperative. And I think the takeaway here, CDFI colleagues, is that this conversation about disability, etiquette, and accommodation is really a twofold conversation. It's about what is the right thing to do for CDFIs in better supporting persons with disabilities. It's also about what's the business thing to do. That it is a business imperative as we think about how our products and services can be most responsive to the diversity of the communities in which CDFIs were created to serve, and serve very well. The disability community is one that we have work to do and are doing work to improve how that diverse community is supported. Next slide. And so my last foundational slide before I pass the track and field baton back to Russ is right here. And this is a baseline for our discussion as Russ takes us deeper into disability etiquette and accommodation on the heels of this discussion around unconscious bias and what we don't know that we don't know. And forgive me if I'm getting on my soapbox, but I wanted to say before I pass the baton to Russ that you as CDFIs are uniquely positioned to provide a range of financial services and products that can address the challenges of individuals with disabilities. And you all know from the work that you do serving diverse communities that you're serving communities that have a variety of needs, and people who are low income, people who are trying to do well for their children and their families. And that's the same conversation for persons with disabilities. So they want what everyone wants: affordable, accessible, and safe housing. They want jobs and employment opportunities, access to assistive products and services to live their best life that can support their health and their living in communities. And I'm excited for what Russ is going to share. I'm excited that you've joined us for this webinar because I deeply believe in the work of CDFIs. And I'm convinced that the products and services that we offer as a CDFI industry can really qualitatively improve the lives of others, and that this conversation is one that will hopefully help you to do that. And so now I'm going to pass the baton back to Russ like a 4x100 meter runner right in the exchange lane. Russ, the baton is yours.
Thanks, Randall. I do have to give a disclaimer at this point. You ran track and field. I'm a football lineman. And so, or at least I was a football lineman. So it may not be with a lot of speed, but I can clear a path.
I love it. I love it.
Next slide, if you would, please, to Brittany. If we can agree that the biggest barrier regarding disability is, in fact, our uninformed or misinformed and bias-based discomfort levels, and that those biases are unconsciously developed beliefs and attitude that can be relearned, I think there's an important component that needs to be brought up at this point as we go forward. From, throughout this PowerPoint up until now, and for a number of slides that you're going to hear from me on, you're going to be getting a lot of information. And I want to challenge you to take this more than just information, but that it's information that I want to ask you to take and challenge you to make the effort to address the biases that may exist in your life. It's really, it's easy for us to get information, have information, and just tuck it away somewhere. It's a different animal when we take that information and we analyze ourselves and we apply it and we make a conscious effort to try to address these things, because that's how we do learn, and that's how we do relearn the biases that we have, and we can put ourselves in some different situations. The other thing that I want to start off with is the premise that disability is part of the human experience. There are those of us on the call who probably have some inability that is part of our experience, whether it is a recognized disability or whether it's something that maybe doesn't rise to the level that we really want, we really recognize it as a disability the way that within the construct that we're talking about here. I happen to wear glasses. I don't necessarily consider that to be a disability on my part, but part of the experience of being a human is I have eyesight that has gradually deteriorated to the point that I need corrective lenses at this point. And it's the same thing for any situation, whether it's an acquired disability, congenital disability, something that's acquired through trauma, or whatever it might be. All around us in life is disability. It doesn't make us or those who have disability unique. It simply means we're all having a human experience, and those who have disability are having a human experience the same way. So I'm hopeful that you can all agree with me that we want to establish that as the baseline for our particular discussion. To Brittany, at this point, it might be worth our while. It sounds like you are ready to try that video again. Maybe this is a great spot to see if we can get that to work again. And if not, I have an option for us if it won't.
Sure, thanks, Russ. I'll go ahead and get that set up. And if, Russ, if you could just communicate with me in the chat box if you can hear the video once I play it.
I will certainly do that.
Thank you.
And thanks for your patience as we get this up and going. No, sounds like we're still having trouble with it. Well, here's what I'd like to suggest then, to Brittany, if you want to go back to the PowerPoint. Would you mind going to that YouTube and cut and pasting that link into the chat box? And then individuals can take that and watch it on their own time. I would encourage you to do that. I think you'd find it not only informational, but we can then, you can also then, see some of the humor and some of the entertaining approach that these folks with disabilities have taken to help convey some of these messages. So we'll put that in the chat box, and you can cut and paste that at your own time. I would encourage you before we go away for you to copy that somewhere so that you can look at it at another time. So with that, I'm going to ask Brittany if you'll go back to the PowerPoint and take us to slide number 19, I believe. There we go. Thank you. And apologies for that video not working. Hopefully you'll be able to watch it on your own time. So the question is, what categories do disabilities come in? While there are numerous types of disability and each person has circumstances that make their life with an impairment their own, we really want to be careful not to lump individuals with disabilities into particular categories. There's a phrase that a colleague of mine says: if you've seen one blind person, then you've seen one blind person. Just because a person has blindness does not mean that they are like every other person who has blindness. Disabilities come in numbers of one. It's important that to understand that each person's experiences with their impairment come in their own unique way and make them unique with that disability. And so, you know, one of the biases that can happen, and one of the things that we tend to do in terms of mental management, is we tend to categorize things. And so it's easy for us to categorize individuals with a particular disability to be part of that group of people with those characteristics. And you do not want to do that. You want to acknowledge each person for who they are. And as you work with them within the construct of your job duties as staff at CDFI locations, is to make sure that you don't go in with any predisposed determination of what that person's life is because of the disability that they may be exhibiting or have, but to really get to know that person, because I guarantee you that they're experiencing it different than the next person who may come in who has the same type of disability or the same disabling condition. I'll also want to highlight here, when we talk about disability, that disability is the only minority group that you can become a member of at any point during your life. There are a number of minority groups that exist, and where people are born into them, or they become part of those minority groups for a lot of different reasons. But disability as a minority group, you can become a member of at any point during the time of your life. And think about if that were you. Would you want to be considered to be, or would you want to go forward thinking that you were just like every other person who had the type of disability that you have now acquired? So that's an important little subtlety that I would like to just highlight as we go forward. To Brittany, next slide, please. For just a few moments, and we're not going to take a lot of time on this, but I want to just pause for a minute and ask you to reflect on what you have been taught throughout your life about how to view people with disabilities. Maybe things that were manifest to you or modeled to you or said to you by parents or by friends or by others. Think a little bit about what you might have as notions of people with disabilities that have been taught you over your life. And as you think about that, don't be afraid to be honest with yourself in this very small exercise. We just talked about how our biases are unconsciously formed, that they're not intentional, and that they're more normal than they are abnormal. We all have them, which makes this kind of a safe space. And as you think about those, and I'm not going to ask you at this point to share them, I just want them in your mind. But as you start to manifest a couple of things that you might have seen manifest or that have been taught you, whether it be through family, through media, through friends, through society, through your work history, or your own personal experiences as a person with a disability, think a little bit about what those might be. And then as you start to wrap those up, well, actually, I think I do want to do that. I was just realizing we do have on our next slide, I do want in our chat, if you would be willing to just put a few of those things that you've been taught. So go to the chat box for just a moment and type in something that you feel you've been taught about how to view people with disabilities. I'm going to be watching the chat box. I'm going to be seeing if people will respond to this and put a few comments in there. It doesn't matter what they are. Again, it's a safe place. You may have been taught something that is seemingly very positive about people with disabilities in your life. Thank you. Everyone is equal, open-minded. Let's keep them coming, folks. Take special extra care of people with disabilities. Yes. One of the things that can be taught is frailty around people with disabilities. I grew up in a home that had, I have a sibling who has a very profound disabling condition. And from a very, very young age, I was taught by society, and because it was prevalent in society, it was also part of what I was taught within the walls of my home, was that people with disabilities need to be protected, that they shouldn't be part of society, that they should be kept at home. Now, I'm a little bit older, And so I don't see that mentality as much today as I did at one time. Great. Taught that we should be inclusive of all. Accessibility of services. Treat others the way you want to be treated. Here's someone whose mother taught special education, and that they were taught all were the same, and that some might need just a little extra help. Here's an interesting one. Don't sit people with disabilities in front of the room. Great. Thank you. Thank you for that exercise. I think that gives you a little bit of a sense of some of the things that we may have been taught throughout our lives. So Brittany, if you'll go to the next slide, please. I'm wondering if any of these things that come up as the next slide comes on board. One more to Brittany. Did any of these come up in your thinking? That people with disabilities are all alike. Some notion that suggests that there's tragedy around having a disability, or that we have to have a sense of pity, that there's a sense of helplessness, or that people with disabilities are angry because of the condition that they may have, or the condition of their life. Sometimes there might be some thinking that there's, that individuals with disabilities need to have stoicism, to be rock hard and firm and be brave. Or that, the purpose of a person having a disability is so that they can be an inspiration to others around them. Sometimes we see it in the media a lot of times, where people with disabilities who do things that maybe they're not expected to do within the common thought processes of a society can be beyond inspirational in what they do, but also might be put on somewhat of a hero pedestal. Well, I can tell you that working with individuals with disabilities, that as you talk with individuals who have disability, and they look at this list that is prevalent in a lot of people's minds, again, because of unconscious bias, they would disagree with every one of those particular statements. They don't want to be heroes. If they're inspirational, great. We all like to be inspirational at some point, but that's not their purpose in life. They certainly don't see themselves as helpful or angry or worthy of pity, or that they have to be so brave. They might have conditions in their life that require them to take on these situations for a moment or two to work through something, but we all have that. But they do that in their own particular way. And so again, ask yourself, did any of these start to appear on your radar as you thought a little bit about that? If you'll go to the next slide, to Brittany, I want to take just a couple minutes and have a touch of reality. Those individuals with disabilities really are just like all of us. They're like you, they're like me, they're like others. They have and share the same desires, the talents, the passions, the needs that others have and want. They do things a little bit differently, but don't we all do things a little bit differently? Probably like a lot of you on the call, or actually contrary to a lot of you on the call, I write with my left hand. A couple of you might be left-handers as well. I do things a little bit differently, but I'm not necessarily seen as a person with disability. We have to look at people who have disability that same way. Not different, but maybe do some things a little bit differently. The reality is people with disabilities deserve the same opportunity as others. And like I see my left-handedness as part of who I am, and we might all see attributes about ourselves as part of who we are and our particular identity. People with disabilities see their disability as part of their self-identity, not separate from it. It's something that is partly what makes up who they are, their personality, how they interact, their view of life, how they approach life. But it's largely not any different than us, only a little bit different. And I think that that's an important thing to recognize. Enough said on that, probably. Let's move to the next slide, to Brittany. So, Generally, personal affect for and approach to individuals with disabilities is directly related to the degree of engagement a person has had with those with disability. If our engagement with individuals with disabilities is low, we have a limited understanding and could have and may have a strongly held unconscious bias. So our tendency is to simply acknowledge the disability. And if we simply are going to acknowledge a condition, our tendency is to attach pity to that. Now, I don't want to make that a hard, fast statement, but in general, if we're simply going to acknowledge, oh, there's that person who utilizes a wheelchair over there, and we don't want to engage to get to know them more, and our interaction with them is limited, and we have unconscious bias that in some cases might even have had a confirmation bias built into it from experiences, then we can trend toward pity. The trend then, when we gain some engagement that moves from a distant state of pity to a more personalized affective state, we start to care. We get to know folks. We get to understand disability a little bit more, and we start to become a little more aware of it and a little more cognizant of it in our observations. We move from that point to I care about your particular condition. And if we go to that point, what might have been a trend toward pity now starts to trend toward sympathy. Hopefully this is making sense as you follow that arrow from at the bottom from left to right. When we move from caring to just, caring about a person and their situation, including their having a disability, then you can start to feel and understand their particular condition. That greater engagement starts to associate with the impact of disability because of those feelings, those understandings, and our own experiences with that. And so at this point, we move to a higher plane where we start to empathize. Then lastly, as our engagement reaches its capstone, as we move beyond empathy, and we see individuals with disabilities as part of humankind and are supporting each other as members of the human race, and to help each other succeed and help each other meet our potential, then we move to that stage of compassion. And when I talk about compassion, I'm not talking about a unique compassion for a person with disability. I'm talking about compassion from the standpoint of exactly what it is we do in the work that we're engaged in when we interact with people to help change their lives in economic and other important kind of ways like you do at centers and CDFIs. When we want to get to that point of compassion, we start to get to understand people at that level. So my encouragement to you here is maybe do a bit of a self-assessment on where you are. Take a look at where you want to be, which I hope is that stage of compassion, and take the steps to start to reach that level. Get experiences. If you see a person coming into the office with a disability, be the person who maybe wants to say, I want to work with that person because I want to learn more about what it's like for that person to experience this human experience and help them to get to why they're coming into this particular office the same way that I would anyone else. I hope that makes sense. Brittany, if you'd go to the next slide, please. Okay, why am I off on that slide? Which slide are you on, Brittany?
I am on unconscious bias in people with disabilities.
What slide number is it?
This.
Yeah, slide 25, Russ.
Oh, is that slide 25? Okay. I wonder what I did because my slide 25 is different. Okay. Well, anyway, we can cover that. It just threw me off for just a minute because of where we are. Unconscious bias in people with disabilities. Couple of key points. Despite substantial progress, people with disabilities remain significantly less likely to be in employment than people who are non-disabled. Over a third, or 36% of people, tend to think of people with disabilities as not as productive as everyone else. And those two factors, if those are some of those unconscious biases that exist, and you see a person with disability come into your office, they've automatically got a couple of strikes against them. And it's not fair. Last one, over 1 in 3 people show an unconscious bias against those with a disability, higher than levels of bias on the basis of gender or race. So a bias can show up for individuals with disabilities even more than biases may exist when it relates to race factors or gender factors as well. Think about that just a little bit. Okay, next slide.
Yeah, that slide's out of place. There we go. You can skip right past it. There we go.
Yeah, okay, there we go. And what's the next slide, Brittany? There we go.
There you go.
That's the one we want. Okay, thank you. So hopefully we've meaningfully set the stage at this point. So let's get down to the basics. Disability first language. When we talk about etiquette with people with disabilities, there's 2 ways that people often will communicate: disability first language or person or people first language. I'm going to tell you right up front, the one you want to follow is that second of the 2 listed there. When we talk about, and we use the word disabled person, oh, that's a disabled person. It draws attention to the limitations and the weaknesses. It draws attention to the disability. It defines the person by their disability, and that kind of language often reinforces stereotypes. What we want is, in a very fundamental piece of etiquette with disability, is be people first in your language and communications. Talk about that individual who utilizes the wheelchair, or that person with a disability. Talk about the person first, the disability second. It focuses on the person primarily. It can draw attention to their abilities. It reinforces acknowledgement of them as a unique individual, not based on the disability when we mention disability first when we speak to a person with disability. Next slide to Brittany. So speaking about a person with, that's when we talk about speaking with a person or to a person with disability. Number 1, start from the people or person first orientation. Don't refer to them initially by their disability. Oh, that crippled person, or that mentally ill person, or things of that nature, where we start to acquire, or we start to establish that we're focusing on the disability first and the individual secondly. Make sure that we talk about the person first. Step number 3, talk regarding them like you would any other person who does not have a disability. If we go into it with the focus that they are a person with disability, our communications are ultimately going to be different. It's okay to acknowledge that they have a disability, but don't focus on it. Talk to them like you would any other person. Don't focus on that disability. And lastly, don't make assumptions about what that person with the disability can do or that they cannot do. Those are important components. And to maybe emphasize this just a little bit more, on the next slide to Brittany, you're going to see a series of pictures. And there's a variety of pictures here, and I'm going to ask you to do something. Let me describe them a little bit because some of them are kind of small. In the upper left corner, you have an individual who has an intellectual disability who is working in a workspace with other individuals, and I can't tell exactly what it is, but it looks like they're in a clothing and a sorting area, and they're interacting with some other coworkers in a work setting. Number 2, you have a dance class, and there are different people who are in that dance class, and you'll notice that towards the center, it's kind of small there, but there's a young woman who is dancing for her class who is using some crutches And you can see that she's using the crutches to help her in her dance, as a person off to the left of her who also has crutches is looking on. And the next picture, number 3, is an individual standing in front of their computer workstation. And they're looking at you and giving you a sense of their personality, and which I think really radiates in this particular picture. And you'll see attached to his arms some Canadian crutches, which suggests that he has some ambulatory or mobility limitations. Picture number 4, it's kind of hard to see, but this is inside a bank. And you have a person who is utilizing a wheelchair, standing with a coworker. We don't know if it's a loan officer, or if it's the bank manager or what, but an individual who is an employee of a bank taking a picture with their coworker. Picture number 5 is a table tennis player, actually a competitive, I don't know if they're professional or not, but a competitive table tennis player who in their right hand has an above the elbow amputation. And number 6 is a couple dancing in, I don't know if it's a ballroom dance or what. It looks very formal, so I would assume it was ballroom dancing. And he is dancing with a young woman who is in a wheelchair, and he's giving her a dancing spin while she is still in the wheelchair, and he is holding her and her wheelchair up as they dance. So I'd like you to just quickly think about what can you discern about one of these. Just pick one or two. And what can you discern about them that is not related to their disability? And what might you say to them if you were to walk up and meet them? Again, not focusing on their disability. And as you think about that, I'm wondering if a couple of you wouldn't mind quickly, and you can do it by speaking up or putting it in the chat box. Standard greeting, thank you. Good morning. They look like they're enjoying what they're doing. Yes. I really particularly love the picture number 6 because there's so much passion around that particular picture. When I say passion, I mean the way that the emotion of that dance and the dedication. Thank you very much, Adrian. There's so much to that is so much in common with the things that we do and why we do them. And it's important for us to take a look and recognize that even though people may have different abilities, I tell you what, I have all my limbs. I think I'd be pretty afraid to go up against that young woman in number 5 on the other side of that table tennis, that table in table tennis. There's dedication, there's capability, there's confidence, there's personality, there's living of life. The body alignment is perfect. Thank you, Elaine. I think that there, and respect to the dancers, I'm one of those. Wonderful. Thank you for that comment. This helps us understand when we get to know people, we get to know them beyond their particular disability. And we have to take more than that 1/10 of a second. And then we can approach our work and our etiquette with them in a much more meaningful way. Deborah, thank you. Joy. Yes, there's a lot of joy in those images as well. Thank you. To Brittany, next slide, if you would, please. So let's talk a little bit about some specifics in the not so. When I talk about disability, there's those that are very obvious to us, and those pictures showed us some examples of that. There are also some specifics about not so obvious disability. So what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about how we ask about a disability that maybe does not manifest obviously, or how do we provide service to them, or other questions you might ask, or what are the important things that you need to know. And in the next slide, we'll take a look at this in a little bit more detail. So if you have a person, and again, you can't assume that a person doesn't have a disability if they don't have an obvious disability. I think it's always important for us to withhold reservation and judgment or determination on things until we spend a little bit of time with them. the first thing to do is ask yourself, yes or no, is it relevant for me to know if they have a disability that is not obvious? In terms of etiquette, we don't ask people information that we don't need to know. So if, when you sit down with an individual, the first thing you don't want to ask them is, so is there a disability that's not obvious to me that you would like to tell me about? Not very good etiquette. But if in the course of our discussion, there is a disability that may not be obvious, we may need to ask ourselves, is it important for me to know? If you're approaching a set of stairs to go upstairs to an office, you might ask them, are you okay taking stairs? Or would it be better for you, or would you rather not? I would say it this way. Are you okay taking stairs, or would you like to take the stairs, or would you prefer to take the elevator? That allows them to respond to you, nope, I'm fine with stairs, or you know what, the elevator would probably be better for me. We may not see an obvious disability that would mean that stairs are difficult for a person. It's a simple, thoughtful way of finding out if a person has a different option or not. Secondly, be alert and watch for signs of a potential, otherwise hidden impairment. Take a look at a situation where maybe they're looking at some papers that you're handing them, and they're making faces that might suggest they're having a really difficult time reading the material that's on that page. Maybe it's the print is too small. Maybe it's because of a learning impairment or other things. So just be watchful and look for signs of potential hidden impairment. When it's necessary, ask about function. And here's my stairs example. Don't talk about, oh, do you have a disability that keeps you from using the stairs? Not a good idea. Ask about the function. Are you able to read the material in the print size that I have it? You don't need to say, do you have a reading impairment or do you have a visual impairment? You can simply say, is your ability to read what I've given you okay? Common functional limitations in order of prevalence are orthopedic, again, ambulation, lifting, carrying, walking, those types of things. They're the most prevalent. Second most prevalent functional limitations that are often not visible are vision impairments. Third are hearing impairments. And fourth are those that are cognitive in nature, intellectual deficits, learning disabilities, autism, things of that nature. So just some areas and some suggestions for you in how you can, in a very appropriate way and with great decorum and etiquette, inquire about and be able to adjust how you're serving an individual so because of an impairment that they might have that is not particularly obvious to you. Next slide to Brittany. Now let's talk about some of the more obvious disability types that we might see. Next slide. Navigating the more obvious disabilities. Number one, be alert as to if you're focusing on the person themselves or to the disability they are presenting. If a person comes into your office and they utilize a wheelchair, are you spending most of your time looking at the chair or wondering about how they're able to get around or how they get around on the bus or whatever? You're focusing on the disability that they're presenting and not on themselves. Be very conscious to focus on them. Make sure that the environment is set up in a way that allows them to move, see, hear, access surfaces, etc. I'll highlight these a little bit later on, but just a couple of things to mention. If a person comes into your office, but the desks are so close to each other that the person cannot get to your particular desk, that's an issue. That's an etiquette issue without even saying a word. If a person who utilizes a wheelchair, you're asking them to sign a paper at a standard countertop that is for people who stand at a reception office, that sends a message of etiquette to them. So make sure that your environment is set up in a way that people with any type of impairment coming in would be able to access everything that they would need to within the office without your having to make it so in order for them to do that. Next, ask first. Do not automatically take control of a wheelchair or take an arm or etc. This is one of the things that I see fairly often. If there's an individual who is visually impaired, who has blindness, people will come up and just take them by the arm and say, okay, come on, I'll help you get where you're wanting to go. Very, very bad form. If you approach that person and say, can I be of assistance to you? And if they say yes, say, how may I help you? And let them tell you. Ask them. They'll tell you how they would like to have you help them out. Don't just automatically take an arm or take control of someone's wheelchair and move them around. And again, ask about function. Yes, yes.
Hey, Russ, this is Randall. You know, I once heard or read, or maybe you shared with me that in some cases, persons with disabilities can see their assistive devices as an extension of themselves. Yes. Meaning, much like you wouldn't arbitrarily touch somebody on their arm or on their leg, you know, a walker or a wheelchair or other device they often see it as an extension of themselves. Is that accurate?
That's absolutely accurate, and that shows up in a slide a little bit later on when we get to it. The answer is yes. If a person utilizes crutches, they see those crutches as part of their being. It's an extension of their physical body. Same with the person who utilizes a wheelchair. That wheelchair is part of them. And so if we're touching that, you know, for example, as you bring it up, Randall, people will sometimes in talking with an individual in a wheelchair, they'll lean on the handle at the back end of it. That's synonymous to talking to a person and leaning against them the whole time you're talking to them. That wheelchair is part of who they are. Don't touch it. Don't lean on it. Or things of that nature. So yes, you're spot on. Spot on. Next slide, DeBrittany. So let's move on to talking about disability just a little bit. The next slide is going to talk about some do's and don'ts. And these are important. Number one on the do's, relax. Don't be uptight. Going back to that video, which hopefully you'll get a chance to see, there's no need to be awkward. It's okay. They're people just like you, just like me. Look them in the eyes. And if that means that you need to change your elevation to look them in the eyes, do it. If you are talking to a person who has a wheelchair, find a chair that gets you closer to their eye level and talk with them. Or squat down for a short period of time. Get at their level. It helps you relate to them. It helps them feel like you are trying to relate to them. Use person-first language. Make sure that you don't talk to them in terms of disability first or talk about them with disability first language. Express yourself as you would to anyone. Talk to them the same way you would anyone else. Get on their physical level. I've kind of already covered that one. Be patient. If a person has a speech impediment, it can take them some time to share what it is they're trying to say. And it's easy for us to want to try to interject or to try to tell them what they're trying to say to expedite things. We need to be patient. Know that they experience disability in their own way. Just because the person you helped with this disability the last time had a particular way of doing things, don't assume that this new person is that same way. So know that they experience disability in their own way. The do nots. Don't focus on looking at the chair, the braces, the impairment, the interpreter, etc. Don't give in to anxiety. Don't suppress your usual communication style. Don't be awkward. Don't use words like victim, afflicted with, suffers from, confined to, or bound by. Oh, I see that you're bound by a wheelchair. That's not an appropriate way. It sends a particular message. As you've heard me talk, I talk about people who utilize a wheelchair. People aren't bound to a wheelchair. They're not victims of polio. They don't suffer from mental illness. They are people who have those as part of the human condition. And so we don't want to use those kinds of words. Don't use highly unusual or high-level vocabulary. Don't be afraid to make a mistake. It's okay to make a mistake. We're all learning in this process. And don't assume they cannot do something. Assume they can do anything until they communicate to you that for whatever reason that's something that they can't do. Although it's okay for you to ask them if there's something they may need some help with. Next slide, please, to Brittany. So terms to use when speaking about people with disabilities. Use their name. People love to hear their name. Don't you love to hear your name? I love to hear people use my name. So talk to them. Use their name. If not that, then you can say, you know, Karen, who comes in looking for resources on Wednesdays. You know, Karen, she comes in on Wednesdays. She has red hair, and she usually wears black slacks with brightly colored tops. You know who I'm talking about, right? She has that really great smile. She has a wonderful personality, and she makes it a point to talk with those who interact with her. Oh, and yeah, by the way, yeah, she uses the automatic door opener because of the wheelchair she uses. Don't start off with, you know, that one lady, she comes in using the wheelchair. She has to use the automatic door. I can't remember her name. It's Karen or Chris or something like that. Make sure that you talk about the person first. Describe the person. And, you know, at some point it may be appropriate to bring up that they have a disabling condition, but don't use that right out of the gates. Hopefully that's helpful guidance. And I kind of already gave this up, but on the next slide, here's the not to do. Don't talk like, you know, that disabled girl. You know, the invalid that comes in on Wednesday, she's confined to that wheelchair, the poor thing. You know, the one who keeps looking for a job opportunity but can't get one. I think she might have red hair, but I don't notice that as much as her being crippled. I think someone said her name might be Karen. Obviously, that's a very, different approach, and it's to an extreme for a reason, but you see the message behind focusing on the person first. And then at some point, if the disability becomes an important thing to highlight, then talk about the disability at that point, but don't focus on it. Okay, I think at this point, we go back to Randall, which is probably good. You've heard from me for a while now.
Oh, thanks, Russ. I'll take the baton from my former football playing fellow left-hander. You got another left-hander here on the call with you. So if we go to on the slide, yes. So some do's and don'ts specifically for CDFIs, and beginning with a great overarching do, which is just taking the time to assess your CDFI's culture and conduct training on disability etiquette. I mentioned earlier, and I'll mention again, that we are currently offering technical assistance and training through the Access for All series. So there's actually nothing stopping you from moving on not just that do, but all some of the other points that Russ has made. Folks like Russ and other disability experts are available to assist you and your organizations in your journey along these lines. So finding someone who could come in and conduct an assessment, ask the right questions, offer some feedback, and then doing a training along the lines of what you're experiencing today. That alone simply raises awareness and begins to change the conversations that are taking place at your CDFI. Conducting a needs assessment to identify barriers that may exist to persons with disabilities, whether that's for employees of your CDFI or for those you're serving through your CDFI, to look at your portfolio of products and services to see where there may be gaps or opportunities, or even just ways of enhancing what is already a great array of offerings. Next, determining the specific needs your CDFI is trying to address. And this really speaks to how you focus your efforts. I'm about to say that one size fits all in a moment under the do nots, but I also know that no CDFI are alike. CDFIs are as diverse as the communities that they serve because they reflect the diversity of the communities that they serve. And so zeroing in on what are the specific needs that your CDFI is trying to address part of that could be an extension of a needs assessment to understand what you may not be offering that would benefit persons with disabilities, and then being very specific about whether that's looking at your housing, your employment, your AT, your assistive technology, or other services that support health and community living that you can enhance, but being very clear about what your specific focus areas are. So those are your do's. On the do nots side, do not assume that an assessment and training alone will change your CDFI's culture. We do a lot of work around culture at BCT and cultural transformation and diversity and inclusion and in creating inclusive environments. And we know that it does not happen overnight. It requires leadership commitment. So for all the executive directors and managers on the line, I'm looking at you virtually right now. It takes leadership, it takes commitment, but above all, it takes consistency, meaning ongoing commitment, that it's not episodic or a one-off, but it's a part of the DNA of your organization, which means you're having conversations and strategy planning sessions and the like on an ongoing basis. Don't assume that one size fits all for CDFI products and services. And this is one of the big takeaways I've gotten from this Access for All series thus far, which is oftentimes we don't take the time to examine how our products and services are or are not tailored, suited, amenable, and responsive to certain populations. And I say certain because I take for granted that in devising our products and services, there were certain populations we took in mind, but there may be populations we did not take into consideration. And so don't assume that just because you've got a great offering, that is great for everyone. Don't ignore the need for performance metrics. If you want to manage it, you've got to measure it. And so when you think about your portfolios, the number of transactions that you've conducted and with whom, when you think about just looking at how products and services are being utilized, the ability to both aggregate and disaggregate that data by demographic groups so that you know who you're serving, who you're not serving. And to the extent that persons with disabilities are a part of how you're analyzing that data, gathering that data, and strategizing to make data-driven decisions, the better off you'll be. And then the last do not is another great place to transition back to Russ, which is don't allow your CDFI to remain passive. We talk about being in our comfort zone. And when we talk about moving beyond our comfort zone to our growth zone, for those of you who responded that you're not currently working in the disability community, today is your day to move from your comfort zone into your growth zone. And we know that growth and discomfort must coexist. You cannot have growth without discomfort. Russ being a football athlete, me being track, we know that our growth as athletes came with lots of discomfort. And so getting back to my earlier point about leaning into discomfort, don't get complacent or comfortable in your CDFI's wonderful work, but be proactive in challenging your organization to ask, what more can we do? And again, we hope today's webinar will be a catalyst in that regard. So with that, I'll pass it back to you, Russ.
Great. Thanks, Randall. Yes, certainly a lot of discomfort, all those two-a-days and other things that we did in football. So, to Brittany, if you'll go to the next slide, I am very aware of our time, and I want to make sure we get through everything so there's some time at the end. In talking about disability etiquette, however, it would be remiss if we didn't spend a little bit of time on accessibility and accommodation. Accessibility refers to the ability of a person with disability to navigate and to have access to all the things that others have access to. Accommodations are methods and means by which people with disabilities can accomplish needed or required tasks. And so as we go forward, we're going to talk a little bit about what can we do to make the locations where we work accessible. so that individuals with disabilities can access them, navigate to where they need to go, be able to utilize anything that anyone else coming in might be able to have.
Bonjour.
Was there a question? Okay. So that would be accessibility, and accommodations are things that we can do to employ for particular individuals based on what they tell us their needs are to help them accomplish those required tasks that we need to have. So on the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about what does accessibility mean. Accessibility really is just ensuring that both the physical and the programmatic components are available and accommodable to all. It's basically, accessibility is leveling the playing field. Now, I think it's really important, and I'll highlight it again, accessibility means more than bricks or mortar accessibility. It's beyond just having a ramp that allows a person who utilizes a wheelchair to access the front door and to get into the building. It's more than having just a countertop that is lower for that same person to be able to sign papers if they needed to do that. It's more than having a relay service if they need to have interpretation or other things because of a hearing loss. In many cases, it can be programmatic. The way that you communicate with them, the forms that you have, is it available to you to be able to provide individuals with large print forms? Or are you available to make sure that if a person needs an interpreter, that you can have an interpreter there to help them with the communication that's needed, things of that particular nature. Other things that relate to this, you know, we talked about rare stair markings, simply marking stairs with yellow lines so that people who have visual impairment but who are not blind and have no sight can navigate that they're coming up on something that is going to change their elevation. Aisleways being clear, various communication devices and other things of that nature. So how can we best evaluate it? It goes back to something that Randall just said. Do a needs analysis. Have someone come in who can do an assessment and who can talk through the basic general accessibility and accommodations that might be available for the types of disabilities that come into your particular workspace. So be aware of what accessibility aspects are in place. There are cases where you might have a physical location that has all that anyone needs physically to be able to be accessible. But if you as a worker there are not sure how to use that communication device, or you're not sure how to help that person or to show them how to access the TTY or the Sorensen relay system or whatever it is, you're not able to help them with that accommodation, despite the fact that your workplace is accessible by definition. Accessibility requires the ability to access that and to accommodate the use of that accessibility issue. I talk about how do you bake a cake. Everyone bakes cakes differently, right? But everyone knows that when they make their favorite cake, they do it in a particular order. Are we making sure that we are aware of all the elements of making the cake, that is the experience a person with disabilities can have when they come into your particular office? And are you aware of what all those ingredients are to make that as good an experience for them as it can be and as it should be, at least equal to anyone else who comes into that center? Consider for a person which of those might be a possible need and keep them in mind. As you start working with an individual, there might be little triggers that you might want to just put a pin in to say, I might want to just kind of remember that in case they might need to have this accommodation or that accommodation. Maybe they need more time to read the forms that are given to them. Maybe they need help from you reading the forms to them. Maybe they just need more time to be able to put their thoughts together and communicate. So learning how to give pregnant pauses while people get their thoughts together if thought processes can be somewhat impaired a little bit. And lastly, ask. You cannot know everything. You can't evaluate every need, nor will they need an accommodation that you have considered. It's okay for you to just simply ask. Is there something I can help you with? Is there a device that you might need that could help you do what we need to have you do? So just be aware of those things. Next slide. We're going to talk a little bit about, continue on with accessibility and accommodations. So this is when someone asks you, what am I going to do when someone requests an accommodation of me? If someone says, I'm here, but I'm going to need an accommodation with reading. Rather than just saying, oh, okay, I'll go get large print for you. It might be that large print is not what they need. So don't jump to a conclusion that a particular ask of an accommodation means that you know what accommodation they need is. If they ask for an accommodation, ask them, how would be the best way for me to provide that accommodation for you? Let them inform you in how you can help meet that accommodation need that they have. Then make every effort to provide it, either then or in the near future. If you're not prepared or you feel like you don't know how to do that or you don't know if something is available, it's okay to say to them, you know what, I want to provide that accommodation to you. I'm not confident in my ability to provide that right now. Would you be okay if let's do what we can today, and would it be okay if we had you come back again in the future or next week, tomorrow, whatever, and I'll be sure to have that accommodation in place so that we can do that. Sometimes that's your best answer. You don't want that to be your standard answer, but sometimes that's your best answer. If you want to ask, if you're asking them if they would like to use certain equipment, how would it help you to use whatever communication device that we have available here? Would it be helpful for you to be able to use a screen reader that we have available, or whatever it might be? Ask them if it would be helpful to them, and then let them answer you yes or no. It's important to have accessibility specialists available if you have them at all available, whether they're on site or whether they're available by a phone call. Have someone who knows. If you don't know how to use a particular device, hopefully someone in the office does know how to use that device, and you can go to them to have them help that individual utilize that accommodation equipment when it's needed. And having basic how-to instructions really help. Having some laminated cards that help you learn how to use the relay system. Having the ability to, a card to help them or to provide information about other technology devices that might help them be able to do something that they need an accommodation on, are all really good interventions to help with that as well. I think at this point in time, it's also important to highlight, and it goes back to something that Randall said, ask a disability or an accessibility expert to come and do a location assessment. I also think it's important that you take a look at what your policies are. What are the customer service cultures that exist within your organization? So look at policies, look at cultures, look at discussions and staff meetings that talk about how can we help folks when they come in. Maybe you've had an experience and you go to a staff meeting and say, I had this happen. It really made me feel kind of like I wasn't prepared for that. I don't want to see that happen to us again. Can we talk about this so we're all aware of it? And make sure that you put things in proper documentation where they need to, so that you have a background and a place for people to go, a resource. And then above all else, establish an all means all culture. That all means everyone that comes in, not just certain populations as well. Next slide, please, to Brittany. I want to just take a couple of minutes and go through this couple of final checklists here. These are kind of in conclusion of my portion. Here's some very disability specific things that as you have this PowerPoint, you can refer back to. If a person has a mobility impairment, be aware of accessibility of that physical space. And if it's not accessible, make it so. Put yourself at their level. Sit or kneel or whatever to see eye to them. Ask if they need assistance before you just help them. Beware the language you use regarding the means of their mobility. Again, going back to stricken by or confined to or other things like that. And don't assume that because a person is in a chair, they can't do stairs. I've seen people in wheelchairs do stairs. Wheelchairs, crutches, or braces are part of the person. Don't touch, lean on, or control them. Next, looking at visual impairments. Verbally greet them and identify yourself, and verbally indicate goodbye or that you are leaving. If a person is blind, they may not know that you're right there, so give a verbal cue that you're there and that you're approaching them. Give a verbal cue that you are leaving and that you're stepping aside, or because if you just walk away, they may start talking to you again and you're not there. Ask if they would like an arm. Don't take theirs to guide them. Verbalize the environment when you guide them. Tell them, we're coming up to some stairs. There's 6 stairs. They're going down, and help them navigate by verbalizing the environment to them. Offer to read written information for them if that's necessary. And maybe even more important than that, be available to provide materials in an accessible format, whether that's providing it in email to them so that they can read it through a screen reader, having Braille, having large print, whatever that might be. Anticipate that need, and if you don't know the first time, make sure that for every time you meet them afterwards that you're providing that material in accessible format. For hearing impairments, maintain eye contact and direct your communication directly to them. Look at them. Don't cover your mouth or your face. A lot of times they want to see your mouth moving, whether they're lip readers or not. It's part of the communication to them. Speak using a normal tone of voice unless you're asked to raise your voice. A lot of times if a person has a hearing impairment, we tend to want to really talk loud at them. We just use our normal voice until they ask us, would you mind speaking a little bit louder? That would help me. Don't just assume that they need that. Wave your hand to get their attention before you start speaking to them. A lot of times if they're not looking at you and we start talking, we have an assumption that just hearing our voice, people will turn their attention to us. It's okay to give your hand a little wave to make sure that you have their attention before you start speaking to them. And if an interpreter is present, don't look at the interpreter, look at the person. That's a thing that you see quite often is when we talk to interpreters while we see people talk to interpreters as they talk to the individual who has the hearing impairment. Always make sure that that person is the focal point of your conversation. Next slide is going to touch on just a few more types of disabilities. Speech impairments. Maintain eye contact and focus on the communication content, not its delivery. You may have to focus a little bit more on hearing what it is they're saying because of an impairment to speech. Don't get focused on the delivery. Make sure that you're not straining, that you have a nice even face, and focus on the content that you're trying to hear. Communicate back to them as you would normally. If they have a speech impairment, it doesn't mean they have a hearing impairment or a processing impairment. Don't be afraid to say you don't understand and need something repeated. And then provide materials in advance for the person to have time to formulate their comments and their responses. Oftentimes, if someone has not had the ability to look at the material you're talking about, they have to process what their answers are and then try to communicate that. If you can get that ahead of time for them and let them formulate their responses, that can be very helpful to them and put them at ease considerably. Mental health and impairments. Avoid stereotypes and assumptions. We don't want to get into assumptions because if you've seen a person with mental health impairment, you've seen exactly one person with a mental health impairment. Recognize all people have differences and treat their manner of processing. Maintain appropriate space. And when I talk about appropriate space, I'm not talking about getting too close to them. A lot of times out of fear, we will stand too far back and we have too much space between us. But we also want to be careful not to, we want to avoid touching persons or touching their belongings. And keep an attitude of support and assistance, not unconscious bias, stereotypes, and fears and awkwardness. And cognitive impairments, When we talk about people who process things a little bit slower or have intellectual limitations, maintain treatment of that person as an adult. Oftentimes we can see that we start to revert to treating individuals as teens or as children if they have cognitive impairments. We don't want to do that. We want to treat them as the adult that they are. Respect them for who they are. Speak directly to them using words and phrases that are easily understood. Don't use high-level words. Ask if they prefer verbal, written, or hands-on instruction or communication. Sometimes a person processes things in writing faster than they do verbally, and the converse of that is true as well. So you can ask would you rather me to read this to you, or would you rather read it? Is one better, easier than the other for you? And keep in mind that a cognitive impairment does not necessarily mean below average IQ. Individuals can have some cognitive impairment, but be very, very bright in nature. Individuals with autism, in many cases, or learning disability, in all cases, have average or better IQ, even though they may have some cognitive impairments. So you want to be careful and keep in mind that if a person has a cognitive impairment, it does not always equate to what their IQ is. You might be surprised to find out how high their IQ actually really is. So in our next slide, we're going to do a quick revisit of unconscious bias. And just to give a little background, and Dr. Pinkett referenced this a lot, it was part of Harvard University's Project Implicit. It measured implicit biases in a host of categories. Those categories included age, race, weight, gender, skin tone, disability, sexuality and sexual orientation, and others. But here are what those findings as it relates to individuals with disabilities found. And I think this is important to remember as we talk about this. From this study, biases toward people with disabilities were found to increase with age, and over time, there were less favorable feelings. So what that said is the older we are, the more likely we're to have biases, and the more likely we are to have less favorable feelings and orientation to people with disabilities. That may or may not be you on an individual basis, but that study found that age definitely had an impact on the biases specific to people with disabilities. Also found that women have less implicit bias than men. So if you're a male and you're working in a center, you may want to just be aware that you might be a little more likely than your female counterpart and coworkers and colleagues to have unconscious bias. Now that doesn't mean that if you're a female and you're working in a CDFI that you don't have implicit biases. It simply means that you, by the study, are a little bit less likely to develop those implicit biases. Thirdly, people with disabilities demonstrate feelings of warmth among their own community and positive attitude toward their peers. If you are a person with disability and a person with disability comes into your office, one very simple accommodation that may, and I emphasize the word may, be helpful for them is to work with you as a fellow person with a disability. But I in no way want to communicate that you should only have people with disabilities work with professionals in CDFIs who have disability. I think that would be an overstep of what I'm trying to communicate, and you certainly want to make sure that people are working with who's most appropriate with them outside of the factor of them having a disability. And lastly, people who had contact with the population of people with disabilities had lower prejudices and lower unconscious bias. So look for those opportunities, whether in the workplace or elsewhere, to interact with people with disabilities, gain greater experience, get to know them, enhance your education, enhance your experiences, enhance your realizations and cognition around people with disabilities. And it will go a long way for you. Next slide to Brittany. I think we covered this again. This is a repeat of the slide that showed up a little bit earlier on, so we won't cover that again. And we're going to turn the time at this point over, I believe, back to Randall. So here's the baton, my friend.
Got it. I'm running. And I've got 9 minutes to complete 1 mile. I think I can do it, Russ. I think I can do it. We can do it. In conclusion, what can CDFIs do? And let me also mention, as a segue from Russ's comments a moment ago, that there is an implicit association test that you can take to measure your level of bias relative to persons with disabilities. If you go to, but I just had the website up a moment ago. If you go to, I believe, project.implicit.org, or you can Google it, you can find the implicit association test and take the test. I've taken many of them, and I found the results. Awareness. But what can CDFIs do? Here are 5 things to take away for CDFI specifically. Foster dialogues within your organization specific to persons with disabilities and your CDFI products and services. Sparking the conversation alone is a wonderful, simple step. We talked about organization-wide assessment, also organization-wide training around unconscious bias with an emphasis on persons with disabilities. Providing coaching to CDFI staff and managers and executives on how to engage with persons with disabilities. I love the idea of reverse mentoring, which is pairing individuals with different backgrounds, perhaps a more junior person with a more senior person, perhaps a new hire with a more experienced hire, and including all the diversity within your organization within that reverse mentoring program, that people are learning about different cultures, certainly included within that maybe learning about persons with disabilities, but it also just creates an overall culture of inclusiveness and understanding that's more receptive to anyone, that includes persons with disabilities. And then lastly, we're big proponents in this work about action and translating awareness into action. And so in that respect, formalizing your commitment to how your CDFI can be accountable to persons with disabilities, meaning is it part of performance evaluation? Is it part of your strategic planning and how you're benchmarking your progress? Is it a part of your performance measures? Anything that is formalizing the commitment, measuring the progress, and holding people in the organization accountable, that is another way of reinforcing the behaviors and the commitments and changing culture, getting back to my earlier comments about consistency being among the greatest keys to this conversation. I'm going to pass the baton back to Russ to talk about additional resources, and then he'll pass the baton back to me for us to close out today's webinar, notwithstanding opening the floor for any questions. So back to you, Russ. The baton's yours.
Thank you. The next slide basically is just a list of websites where you can go to get additional information on disability rights, on disability etiquette, on the things that we've talked about here today. If you were to put into your Google, if you put into Google disability etiquette, you're going to see any host of number of information. I tried to pick some of these out that come from organizations that are known across the country and known within the disability communities and those that serve them as reputable sources, and they're going to give you some good, meaningful information. And so we wanted to make sure you had places that you could go outside of just this presentation to get additional information on how to provide etiquette to individuals with disabilities when you come into your offices. And that's all I think I'll say on that, so we have some time afterwards. So Randall, back to you.
Awesome. Awesome, Russ. And thank you to, I believe it's Petter. I could be pronouncing the name incorrectly, but he asked for the link to the implicit association test. I just put that in the chat log. It's implicit.harvard.edu, implicit.harvard.edu. So you can go there and take the test. It'll come up clearly in your browser. And before we move to questions, if you have any questions beyond today's webinar, feel free to email those questions to cdfi@bcppartners.com. And I've made repeated references to the availability of technical assistance and training through the Access for All series. You can apply for technical assistance and training by going to www.accessforall.info. There's a simple form to fill out. Somebody will reach out to you and do a quick triage of what your interests are and see if we can get an expert out to work with your organization. The deadline for TA is January 31st. It just got extended. So if you're going to move on TA, I recommend you move very, very quickly so that your organization can take advantage of it. And with that, I'll pause and we will open the floor for any questions. And I thank you, Peter. Your name is pronounced Peter. I got you. I got you. All right, the floor is open for questions or comments.
Sounding like maybe we don't have any, unless people are typing them into the chat box, which would encourage you to do so. We'll hang on for a bit and we can try to answer those. But like Dr. Pinkett said, go to that website for any follow-up questions. We'll make sure to get responses back to you. And I just want to say it's been a pleasure. I feel like we fed you with the fire hose a little bit today, but hopefully this is helpful information that at least changes some thought processes. And then when you get the PowerPoint itself, have availability to it can be a resource that you can refer to time and time again. So with that, Randall, I'll let you or Brittany close up, but I just thought I'd throw that in there to make sure that we are responsive to needs that may come up after this is over.
No, thank you, Russ, and thank you to Elaine Hoskins for the thank you. Appreciate the feedback. Thank you, Peter, for your feedback. I got your name correct now. It's Peter. He typed it into the chat log. And Russ, thank you for sharing your expertise today. Pleasure working with you. Thank you to everybody on the webinar for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be a part of this Access for All training series. And once again, please go to accessforall.info to apply for training in TA. There's also in the chat log, and I'm sure Brittany will reinforce this, a webinar evaluation. There's a link in the chat log for you to complete an evaluation. Please click on that link and provide feedback. It is invaluable to the work that we're doing. So if you could just take a moment to do that, we would be greatly appreciative. And so with that, I'll pass it to Brittany and we can close out the webinar.
Thank you very much to both Dr. Pinkin and Mr. Russ Thielen from ICI for a great presentation. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day.